Today I'm exploring one of the more interesting and macabre sites here in San Diego, California, and that is Mission Hills Park, also known as Pioneer Park. And while today you see kids playing on the playground and families picnicking here at a beautiful community site, what most of them don't know is that thousands of dead bodies still lie at rest just a few feet beneath them. Now, as mentioned, this site was once a cemetery known as Calvary Cemetery, and it originated here in the 1870s, so it's one of San Diego's oldest and one of its first cemeteries. And it was an active cemetery from the 1870s well into the 20th century. In fact, it's believed that the last burial took place here in 1960. But around the 1930s or so, as vandals and other people started damaging or really not taking care of the cemetery, they built this adobe wall around its perimeter. And through the next few decades, unfortunately, it continued to fall in disarray. In 1968, the city of San Diego was given the cemetery to essentially do what they wanted with it. And they decided to create a community park out of this space. And what most of you are probably picking up at this point, they didn't necessarily move all the bodies. Now, a few of the living relatives of folks that were buried here did reinter their family members, but at least 1,800, and some sources say up to 4,000, bodies remain here in the ground underneath Mission Hills Park. One interesting story from this whole saga occurred in the 1980s. Now, when San Diego built its new trolley line, it actually cut through Mount Hope Cemetery, and it still does today. And during this inaugural ride of the trolley, when they were passing through Mount Hope Cemetery, what some of the city officials and others noticed was basically a pile of tombstones down in a ravine at the cemetery. And of course, that was not a good look for anyone. And after a little bit more research, they learned that most of those tombstones actually came from here, from Calvary Cemetery, and they were simply discarded, thrown into the ravine there. And what they ended up doing was taking most of those and burying them there at Mount Hope Cemetery, and they also encased some of them in cement there, sort of as a memorial. But today at Pioneer Park, you'll notice a row of headstones that remains. Now, these were taken here, just a few of the ones that were here, as a tribute to those that still lie at rest here at the park. And here we see a section of the original adobe wall that was built here in the 1930s, and it marks the perimeter of what the cemetery once was. And it was built by the WPA, largely as a way to, again, mark off the cemetery, but also as a way to deter potential grave robbers. And just to think that this is, again, about almost 100 years old, it's in pretty good shape, but as you go around the park, you'll notice that a lot of the wall is either missing or broken down all the way to its base. But here we see a good section that's still pretty well intact. And here we see the placards of over 1,800 names listing those that are laid to rest here at the park. Again, some sources say it could be up to 4,000, but at least based on this, we know there's at least 1,800 people laid to rest here now at Pioneer Park. And here is the row of tombstones that were originally over the burial sites of the people that are here listed. And today, this row of tombstones acts as a sort of memorial for those that still lie to rest beneath the ground here. One thing I noticed that, being San Diego, you'll see a lot of here on the West Coast, a lot of them were born overseas, some born in Ireland, some in Italy, and it just goes to show you that it really was a melting pot out here in the West. People from all over Europe. So here we see born in Ireland. Here, actually another reverend, a native of Belgium. There's somebody that was born in Italy, and you really do see, people born all over Europe. And it came all the way out here for whether it was the promise to strike it rich, the promise of land, or just new opportunities. Here you see a lot of people that came out west from the East Coast, and again, from all over the world. One thing I noticed about this section is they're all listed as reverends. Here we see rest in peace for Reverend J.J. Reardon. Here, Reverend Cornelius O'Hanlon. And since this was a Catholic cemetery, you'll notice a lot of the names and a lot of the origins of these folks was from Ireland. And this really is just such a beautiful memorial. One thing that is kind of interesting is where these headstones are located. If you look at some old pictures and maps, there's not really any bodies here at this site, although all these headstones have been arranged here as a memorial. But a lot of the bodies do lay and are in the ground throughout the main part of the park, to include the playground itself, which I think is a little eerie. There are a few well-known families from early San Diego history that were buried here and remain here. That includes the Bandini family as well as the Coots family. And here we see the headstone for Cave Johnson Coots. And he was born near Springfield, Tennessee, and he actually attended West Point and was there at the same time as Ulysses S. Grant was. And if I remember correctly, I believe he was actually a veteran of the Mexican-American War as well. And here we see a couple other headstones for that family. Back here at the center of the memorial, we see a stone monument marked 1870 to 1939, dedicated to the San Diego Pioneers. San Diego Parlor number 108 NSGW. And this commemorates by this monument the benevolence of persons who by liberal bequests, donations, and long continued support have so greatly aided in the rehabilitation of Calvary Cemetery. Here in this section we see a lot of the military style headstones placed into the cement, and these were all veterans of various wars. Here we see a veteran of the Mexican-American War, and of course I've mentioned in other videos how veterans of both the North and the South came out west to California, and since this cemetery had its first burial in the 1870s, that was a perfect time for veterans of the Civil War who may have died out here to be laid to rest. Of course we see a lot of men who fought for the Union here for the 69th Illinois Infantry. This one's pretty interesting. We see Peter Johnson, Chief Boatswain's Mate in the U.S. Navy. And it just goes on. 16th Massachusetts Infantry, the 162nd New York Infantry, the 18th New York Infantry. This really is such a beautiful park for people to come have a picnic, for kids to play. There's a lot of people running around with their dogs, throwing the stick. And again, you kind of wonder how many people realize what's going on just beneath their feet. And you know, any inquiring minds will obviously see that row of headstones and realize what's going on, especially if they're local, they may know. But a lot of people who visit San Diego have no idea that this is here. And I don't really know how many places exist like this in the United States where a cemetery was turned into a community park and they just never moved any of the bodies. I find that quite strange and a little disrespectful to the dead, but either way, very interesting, and it's nice that today it is a community park for people to enjoy. One thing I noticed about the park are these trees. Now, I don't know the exact age of these, but these trunks are gigantic. And I imagine some of these trees have been around since the early years of the cemetery, potentially. But just another beautiful aspect of this community park today. Pioneer Park is really one of the most fascinating places I've visited. To think that what was once a cemetery for decades is now a community park, and they really didn't move any of the bodies. You know, a few were moved by family members, but in all reality, you still have, as mentioned, at least 1,800, potentially up to a few thousand people laid to rest here. It's just so strange, but it is a beautiful park, and at least it's a little bit of a tribute to those that are laid to rest. Well, that's all I have for you folks for now. It's on to the next journey.